And I will call this meeting to order.
Thank you, Your Worship. Item 1 are minutes of the regular council meeting held Monday, October 15th. The recommendation is that council approve those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor Nicholson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 2 is City of Coquitlam Heritage Revitalization Agreement Authorization Bylaw number 4345-2012, 1313 Cartier Avenue. The recommendation is that council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to City of Coquitlam Heritage Revitalization Agreement Authorization Bylaw number 4345-2012.
It's moved by everybody, it's seconded by everybody else. Councillor Reamer, Councillor Nicholson. Apparently we're all in favor. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 3 is City of Coquitlam Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4347-2012 for the RT3 Triplex and Quadruplex zone. The recommendation is that council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4347-2012.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor Nicholson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 4, City of Coquitlam Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4342-2012 in relation to secondary school parking. The recommendation is that council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4342-2012.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, seconded by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 5, City of Coquitlam Zoning Text Amendment Bylaw number 4236-2012 is a text amendment for the implementation of the Transit-Oriented Development Strategy. The recommendation is that council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to Zoning Text Amendment Bylaw number 4236-2012.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. I'll make it clear that that relates to the zoning. Our voting tonight is about the zoning, not about other transportation-related issues.
Your Worship, I'm going to excuse myself from voting on this item as it's in my neighborhood. Thank you.
In the interest of consistency.
Item 6, City of Coquitlam Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4337-2012 related to 3349 David Avenue. The recommendation is that council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4337-2012.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, seconded by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Oh, it was leftover dinner there.
He found the donuts.
He found the Timbits. Okay.
Item 7, City of Coquitlam Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4346-2012 for 820 Robinson Street. The staff recommendation is that council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4346-2012.
Moved by Councillor Nicholson, seconded by Councillor Robinson. I've got I had raised some questions during the public hearing, and I still have some concerns related to the ultimate size of some of these buildings, and so I'm going to support this, but I do want to see us continue to push. I'd rather have more units with more smaller units rather than simply end up with larger units on the site. I want to make sure that as much as possible, we didn't hear too much during the public hearing. We got some in letters along that line about the scale of the building related to the neighboring buildings. And I suspect that as we push forward with the kinds of housing choices programs that we have are directing down in, further south of this, that we will end up with that scale of the building being an issue. On this one, I have some minor concerns related to the scale. The drawing I was reading had numbers that didn't make sense to me, and subsequently I realized that the reason that they didn't make sense was they were so small and I was misreading the table. But nonetheless, I still have some concern related to that, and I did want to speak to that before we vote. I will support the item. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. My concerns are when we are having basements in the triplexes, duplexes, and fourplexes, and I want to make sure that I would like to see daily fines of $100 a day or monthly fines of $1,000 a month for people that are going to start putting illegal suites in these buildings. What it does, it just totally destroys the fabrics of the neighborhood, and I think if we aren't prepared now at this moment to do that, somehow we have to get some agreement with the folks that are buying these units, and I think we can. We have to put something on title. I'm willing to go to the end of the wall for this one, but I'll approve this one going forward. But if there become, I really think we need to get something on the books that illegal suites can't start popping up all over the place, or we're just going to fail before we even get started in redoing our housing choices.
Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, what concerns me is just what Council Reid said. You know, years ago, there was many duplexes built in Coquitlam. I'm talking about in the early 70s, 60s and 70s. You know, and they all had basements. What came about was fourplexes. They're fourplexes. You know, and then in the 80s, I decided that we're not going to allow duplexes to have basements, just crawl spaces. So therefore, there was no duplexes being built because they could not have a fourplex. See out of it. So there was no use of building a duplex. Couldn't make it a fourplex. Now they're coming back again. And I guarantee you, as God made little green apples, that the fourplexes are going to become something more, and the duplexes are going to become fourplexes and so on. There's no two ways about it. And you put a $1,000 fine a day, you put a $1,000 fine a month. We have only so many inspectors, and certainly not going to go door knocking or have a right to walk into the person's home and say, I want to inspect your basement. For what reason? Yeah, I mean, you have to have a reason to go in there. And frankly, I'm really, really concerned that we're opening up a can of worms that maybe not today, not next year, the following year, but the future council, 10, 15 years from now, are going to be living with not a fourplex, but will be eightplex, and many, many other things. That's a given. Just, you know, you leave room for people to take advantage of the zoning, and they'll do it. It's a nature. That's the way it is. The more money they can make, the better they do it. And frankly, I'll tell you, and then there's more cars on the street, very limited amount of parking, and so on. So I'm just saying this. I'll support this one, but frankly, I'm really, really, really concerned that we're allowing full-size basements in these kind of operations. The best thing to do is say you'll have crawl spaces in there for your furnaces, whatever it may be, it's just a crawl space, period. And so I remember one time a gentleman built a duplex with just a crawl space. Guess what? We found out later on that he was digging out a basement. I'm going to put a fourplex in. So those things do happen. You know, yeah, I've got concerns, Mayor, with this one. But I will support it. But I think we need to go another way.
Councillor O'Neill.
I'm wondering if I could find out, are these indeed full basements, partial basements? Do we have any idea about what the square footage of these basements will be?
We were told about 900 square feet.
Oh, I see, okay. Oh, I see it there.
Yeah, the basements are actually slightly larger than the main floor, which are slightly larger than the top floor, so that...
Got it. I missed that. Thank you.
Mr. Alweo.
Your Worship, if it would help Council and Councilor O'Neill, the proponent's architect is here. No, that's fine. Oh, it's okay.
Public hearing is over.
Actually, I'm going to... is it possible... I mean, we're only doing the zoning here. Is it possible to... I noticed that all three basements have a basement door exterior, a set of stairs down to a porch. It's almost impossible to put a suite in a basement if it doesn't have an exterior entrance. Has it been considered, and we've done this before on a townhouse project, to allow a full-size basement but make it only accessible from the interior staircase rather than from an exterior door? At least when they do try to redevelop it, they're going to have to do it from the outside by building a staircase. Is that a contemplation that we could consider?
It is, Your Worship, many municipalities have looked at those, essentially the convertibility provisions, so essentially design a building that has limited access to the outside, certain limitations on convertibility of the way that the basement is designed, covenants for notice to owners. There are a suite of measures you can take to assist in the reduction propensity for suite conversion, or for essentially a basement to be converted to a suite. There are measures of that nature, Council.
That's what we're looking for, is a suite of measures that we can take to prevent this. Oh my goodness! Because I look at the rear elevation, which is attachment 7, and they're not very. I don't think the way they're designed here, they're very good suites. Because they've got relatively small windows, but we know what happens sometimes. The foundation gets built just slightly shorter, and the windows are slightly larger, and et cetera. And so we end up with a somewhat livable suite. In fact, the only thing worse than a livable suite is a barely livable suite, and I think that actually is poor public policy. So anything we can do, and I see Councillor Robinson has something probably on the same issue.
Yeah, I do actually. I want to know, how far is this from the proposed Coquitlam SkyTrain station? Is it more than 500 meters?
Yeah, Your Worship, it is more than 500 meters. It isn't, but it might be a kilometer and a half. Like it isn't.
It isn't terribly far, but it's
terribly
still
far. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess what I made the suggestion related to removing of the back staircase. I assume staff will now take that into consideration in discussing it with the owners, and there's a development permit required here, so when it comes back for development permit, we'll watch. Any further discussion on this? All in favor?
Your Worship,
Oops.
just 1 minute. The development permit for our T3 projects has been delegated to staff.
Well, whose idea was that?
However, council can provide direction to look at the convertibility issue and to look at that issue as part of the approval of the
Please have a look at the
permit.
convertibility issue.
Your Worship, these aren't new comments or new concerns, and as Raul said, there's a range of measures to deal with it. So let staff take that away and have a look at the various measures that can be put in place, and certainly as we deal with the applicants in the future. I think it was heard loud and clear tonight with this DP going forward, and we'll look very closely at that. And in dealing with future applications, I think it's quite right, as Councillor Reid said, it's really heartening to see these innovative and really neat housing choices applications coming along. It's just not the old duplex boxes anymore. We're seeing some good stuff, but we want to make sure it's good stuff in the right form and in the right sort of size and layout. So we hear you. Let us take that away, and we'll work at that.
If I can, Your Worship, one last comment. As luck would have it, this particular project is described in the report in a little bit of detail. We'll have to come back to Council for a development variance permit. Therefore, we would ensure we will work with the proponent to address the issue of suite convertibility and bring that forward as part of the DVP.
Thank you very much. I knew it was a mistake to delegate that authority here. Okay. Now we can vote. All in favor of second and third and fourth readings? All opposed? That motion carries unanimously. And I do want to make comment to the applicants. This is not about the applicant. This was about the history that we see sometimes in our community with subsequent owners, and so we fully expect there's a reputable applicant out there. Go ahead.
Next item, we've reversed the orders of item 8 and 9 on the agenda.
Yes, as I was supposed to mention at the beginning of my meeting, it's right here.
So the next item, item 9, is City of Coquitlam zoning map amendment bylaw number 4267-2011, related to 955 Madore Avenue. The recommendation is that council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to zoning map amendment bylaw number 4267-2011.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor Nicholson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Going back to item 8, City of Coquitlam zoning text amendment bylaw number 4336-2012, related to the RT1 two-family residential and RT3 triplex and quadruplex residential. The recommendation is that council give second, third, and fourth and final readings to zoning text amendment bylaw number 4336-2012.
All right, moved by Councillor Nicholson, seconded by Councillor Reamer. All in favor? Oh, Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. How big is this property?
66.
This is two city blocks.
2 city lots?
2 city blocks. This is the text amendment
Yeah.
for 2 city blocks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. So, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 10, fourth and final reading of City of Coquitlam Annual Taxation Exemption Bylaw number 4332-2012. Recommendation is that council give fourth and final reading to City of Coquitlam Annual Taxation Exemption Bylaw number 4332-2012.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, second by Councillor Robinson. Councillor Sikora, are you done?
Oh, I'm finished.
That was the previous one.
My
Okay.
apologies.
Okay. That was fourth and final. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you to all those churches and community groups that do such great work.
Item 11 relates to the Riverview Lands Heritage Conservation Plan follow-up, and this is follow-up from the October 15th regular council meeting. The recommendation is that council receive the report of the Deputy City Manager titled Riverview Lands Heritage Conservation Plan follow-up for information.
Councillor O'Neill, did you have something before motion, or did you have something before motion? Or?
No.
No. Is there a motion?
Yes. No, not yet. I want to move an amendment to it, but I...
Okay.
Well, yeah, I do too, actually. So it's,
I'll move it onto the floor.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Robinson, second by Councillor Nicholson. The staff recommendation, I'm going to assume. And over to you, Councillor O'Neill.
thank you. It was Councillor Reed's, who was missing last week. It was a lot of my questions that led to this deferral, and those questions about centered on what the 2005 report actually said and whether or not the staff summary that we were given last week was fully was a comprehensive condensation of that report. And the recommendation last week was that we reaffirm our support for the 2005 task force report. And we've had time now to revisit the 2005 report, and I actually think the staff did a good job of summarizing it. And that being the case, some of my original concerns still stand. Now, we could today I think we have 3 options in front of us today. One would be to basically not do anything and just continue to let the 2005 report stand without reaffirming our support to it. We could reaffirm our support, or we could modify our support for it. And I'm going to suggest that we modify our support for the 2005 task force report because of changing circumstances and because of past council decisions as well. So I'm reminded earlier in committee we talked about the strategic plan being the city's strategic plan being a directional document that guides but does not limit future actions. I think we should be looking at the 2005 task force report as something that guides but does not limit our future actions. And that being the case, I don't want to see a specific reaffirmation of Council's support of it. I think we have to be honest and say that we do want some flexibility going forward here. So, as I mentioned last week, just last year, Council supported unanimously a motion to ask for the Royal Columbian Hospital to be rebuilt on the Riverview lands. To my reading of the 2005 task force report, that would not be something that task force would agree with. It would be fairly disruptive to the site's landscape, to its tranquility, all those sorts of things. I think it would be a wonderful use of the Riverview lands, especially if all the trees and the arboretum can be kept there, and maybe some of the heritage buildings can be reused and things like that. But there would be a lot of disruption of the site. It wouldn't be anything like what the task force imagined. I also raised the specter of if Steve Ballmer of Microsoft were to come and say, I want to set up a huge new North American campus here, and this looks like a perfect piece of land for it, we would have to say, well, no, that wouldn't be allowed, because we're totally in agreement with the 2005 task force report, which doesn't really see that sort of usage. So I think we have to be honest about the flexibility that we see, and not leave this up to some other council, not shirk our duty. I think we have to face it now to say, okay, well, we like the general sentiment of the 2005 report, but we do want some flexibility there. So I would suggest that we pass a motion that would read something like this. Be it resolved that Council is in general agreement with the vision and guiding principles enunciated in the Riverview Task Report of 2005, while at the same time also remains open to suggestions to reanimate the site that, while not strictly adhering to the guidelines articulated in that report, are sensitive to the spirit of the task force's work. So I think that works. I think that actually reflects everything that I've heard from people on council. Nobody wants to tie our hands about what we can do with this going forward. We want to respect the site, its heritage, its important values, but we want the flexibility that I don't think the 2005 report gives us. You might think this is opening a can of worms, but I don't think so. I think this is what the vast majority of Coquitlam residents would want to see. They want to see this site put to good use while respecting the general overall values that were enunciated, the vision and the guiding principles that were enunciated in the task force report, the general values, but not the specific uses that were stated. And I could enunciate all those uses, but it's in the report. And I've already spoken for about 5 minutes, and I think that's enough this time. So we'll hear out. I think before I said I'd like to have a second around this. Let's hear what everybody else's suggestions were, and maybe we can come to a mutual agreement of some sort. But I really would like to see some sort of a little more general, a little more flexible, rather than just simply rubber stamping the 2005 report.
Well, it may not be a can of worms that you've opened, but it is a list of speakers.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Hodge.
Yeah, I was also going to suggest, I have a couple of changes that I wanted to make, so I'm just wondering if we want to sort of go one change at a time, debate this one before I throw something else out onto the floor and really mix this up.
Okay. I'm going to suggest that wasn't a motion because it wasn't framed as a motion.
Was it
didn't have a
framed as a
seconder.
motion?
We do have a motion on the floor that is to receive, and that's fine. We can dispose of that relatively quickly. But let's allow the debate now to continue under the motion to receive, and then we'll entertain what might be presented as a successful motion following that. So go ahead.
Okay, so I don't know where I'm going with this, other than to say, I guess my first question is, through the chair, Councillor O'Neill just suggested a revision, and I'm assuming he's just suggesting 1A, or is that in lieu of 1A, B, and C? You're looking at the council to reaffirm the task force?
I'll be flexible. Go ahead.
That resolution would replace all of 1A, B, and C.
Okay.
That's what gets pretty specific. 1A is specific. Replace all of that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'm open to tweaking some wording to give us some options, because I think that we recognize that we don't want to limit the potential for creating some economic development on the site that's compatible with the existing buildings and the grounds. So I certainly wouldn't want to turn down an opportunity that might be compatible without being specifically outlined in the 2005 report. So I don't know if those are the exact wording I would want to use, but I'm sort of open in the flexibility, particularly in 1A. But in 1B, the Riverview's heritage buildings, landscapes, and arboretum should be protected and preserved. You know, I know there's some issues about can every building be, but certainly the landscapes and the arboretum should be protected and preserved, and I think efforts should be made to protect the heritage buildings. And on point C, Riverview land should remain publicly owned and not for market housing. I absolutely agree with that statement. So I'm sort of agreeing that there may be some ability to sort of open up some options and not limit us, but I don't know that I want to go quite as far as Councillor O'Neill is suggesting. And as I said, I have some points that I'd like to add, but I'll wait till we come back and I'll add those later after we've debated this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you very much. I sort of take exception to some of the, I don't take exception, I just don't agree with some of the points that Councillor O'Neill has made. And that if you go
Sorry,
into
we've lost the whole speakers list. I wonder if you could activate her microphone. If you were on the list to speak, we've lost the speakers list.
Sorry, when I switched over, it seemed to have lost everybody's speaking order.
Okay, so if you could push your button, please, Councillor Reid. And if you were on the speakers list, could you please push your button now?
Sorry.
There we go.
Shall I go ahead?
No, you've lost your opportunity to speak. Councillor Sewell. Oh, what the heck? Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So what had happened last week, I agree with the reaffirming the following key priorities for the Riverview lands. And I have to tell you, when we started into this program on the future of Riverview, it definitely was that. It was the future of Riverview. What we were dealing with, it's unlike dealing with something in the city where we could say, okay, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to do this. We're now taking it upon ourselves and a lot of community groups to start planning what we would like to see on someone else's land, which, you know, isn't the best path to go down. But what we did, and we had just an absolutely brilliant staff person, Jennifer, here, who was able to, Jennifer Wilkie, who she was just so brilliant. We spent over a year putting all the facts together, and I have to tell you that the new Heritage Conservation Plan, it's a lot more detail. I doubt that there's 10 things in this that we didn't know in 2002. They're better detailed, better documented. Some aren't. They came right from our work. But basically, it's what we knew. So with all the things that we knew, we went in to see, we started down the path to see what would be best on these lands. The first thing we realized, and very quickly did we realize, was that the province already had plans to redevelop 2 or 3 sites immediately, which they have, the Connolly Lodge and the other 2 of them, right away. That was what they were going to do. So they said that although they were going to close down Riverview Hospital, they were still going to put places of wellness, mental well-being on the site. it was always sort of thought that that's what Riverview started out with, and at some time in its life, it supported jobs for 2,500 people. So when I got on the committee and I looked at it, there were people from all walks of life. There were the horticultural groups, there were the heritage folks, there was the nurses, there were nurses' unions represented, there were a lot of community people that were involved in mental wellness of some sort on the committee. Councillor Donnelly became my vice chair, and between us, we did a lot of work on this. We did a tremendous amount of work on this. And I would tell you that on page 9, you would see that it says that advanced education research for SFU. We were in touch with SFU at one time and thought that we almost had a satellite campus. But we were looking for graduate teaching and research in forensic psychology, expanded sciences, research, public health, and preventative medicine. There are all kinds of gerontology, early childhood development. We could put any hospital on this site that we wanted. One of the reasons we also thought that we might have a benefit by sticking to the mental wellness is we have the Forensic Institute across the street on Colony Farm. At that time, and still now, we have an enormous amount of researchers and psychologists coming from all over North America that come here to do work at that institute. And we thought that perhaps it would be really useful to us to work on that aspect and see if we couldn't get a research center set up right at Riverview. When you say we can't do it all, I think we can. We were very careful to point out the brownfields, the buildings that could be taken down, that we could rebuild on. We had one Chinese medicine hospital come to us, and we sent them immediately to the province and got no reply, no anything. They were willing to invest millions of dollars, even on a lease land basis, to build a Chinese hospital, a teaching hospital, which we thought would have been a perfect thing. I've always wanted to see a veterinarian college, a campus from UBC or SFU. Animals are the biggest business in North America right now, and if you want to become a veterinarian, you have to go to Saskatoon. What's wrong with Riverview lands? We could even have large animal hospital here as we have Colony Farm across the street. So the reason I'm going into all this is because I think there is room for everything here. And I think everything will have to be glitched a little and everything will have to be tweaked, but there is room. And I think we made this plan as open as we could. I think we do recognize that it was always wellness. When we approached the First Nations folks, they recognized that this land had special meaning for them as a place of wellness and healing too. So we tried to deliver all that we could. My biggest problem with this, and I will end because I have a motion that I want to add on to what's on here, an amendment, and basically I want these two documents read together. Because if someone was sitting in the legislature, and I know our mayor has before, receives this document, a heritage plan, reads through it and says, oh wow, cool, but you know, all this is wrong and all that's wrong, let's just bulldoze the place and sell it. But maybe what they need to do is read this along with it. And maybe they need to know that there's a whole community here who already knew all this, and yet we can still come up with a plan that can be a huge economic driver for our city. Do I want market housing there? No. I'm already going to have 30 high-rises somewhere around this city with folks in them. They're going to need jobs somewhere. This is my economic package. This is where I can deliver something that the generations 20, 30, 40, and 50 years down the road are going to need. They're going to need health care, and they're going to need all kinds of health care, and probably all kinds of other services that can be put on these lands as well. So I have an amendment, Your Worship. Do you want me to read it now or wait?
You can read it. You can read it now, but
I will read it now just so that you know it's very simple. It says, we wish to convey to the province that it is most important that they read and consider the Riverview Lands Heritage Conservation Plan in conjunction with the For the Future of Riverview report, and that we forward the recommendations 1 and 2 to the province along with a copy of this report. And I think that is so important so that whoever is reading this can get a full look at the picture and get a full look at what we expect of this site. We expect great things of it, but we can also look after it in a wonderful way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor. You know, the worst thing that can happen here is have a council split on Riverview lands. We have a split council, you know how Victoria will react to it. They'll react in a negative way, not to our liking, because number one, they'll say your council cannot make up their minds. What is it that we want on these lands? And I don't see anything wrong with the things that we passed before and the things that are before us now. I mean, it says Riverview Heritage Buildings. We know some of those buildings cannot be restored. They're beyond restoration. But you know something? The provincial government come to us, take us on a tour, and point out those buildings cannot be restored. And I know any council member, whether it be this council or future council, can say you're right. So we can change that. You know, there's things that, you know, it doesn't matter what we pass. The future council can always change it. We can change it in a month or two ourselves, or even next week. You know, the government, look, well, it doesn't matter what government is in Victoria. Whether it's the Liberals, whether it's the NDP, they will do whatever they think they want to do with this land. Number one, that the government of Victoria does not have to adhere to our zoning bylaws. They don't even have to go through rezoning on this land. They can say, Coquitlam, step aside, we're doing what we think is best. I think it'd be a stupid thing to do. And when Council Reid mentioned somebody else's land, it is our land. It is our land. It's the taxpayers' land. So we're part of that. There's no question about it. You know, and the task force has been working for years. They were working in the 80s on the Riverview lands.
No, different one.
Yeah, you know, I remember appointing a Riverview committee when I was mayor years ago. So it continues, and Riverview lands and Colony Farms. Last meeting, I gave a history of Colony Farms and Riverview lands back into the early 70s, because I was on council then. And the fact is, I gave you a history of what took place. And what took place is really has to be the most stupidest thing I've ever seen happen through the governments, through both governments. I mean, the NDP sold off all the animals. They sold off all the machinery. And then the Premier, Gordon Campbell, is saying that place should never be closed. Well, if I'm the Premier, I can open it again. So why say it? You know, I mean, that's why you're having all these problems downtown, where the police are shooting people with knives and hammers and you name it, because they're mentally disturbed. And then you lose lives of what happened at Riverview Hospital. They're downtown, they're creating problems, and the police have no other choice. When the guy's coming at them with a hammer or a knife, what are you going to do? So those things do happen. So one thing we have to do, we have to go past the resolutions that's before us and not sway from it. Let's march together on a path that we're united. And I know that Councillor Reid has got a motion there, and I'm sure that Mr. Councillor O'Neill might have another motion. I think whatever it is, we need to march together, okay? Be united, because we can change the resolutions next week or week after, or whatever it is. Anything can be changed, but I think for the time being, we need to pass a strong message to the government that Riverview lands is not for sale for high-rises or any other kind of housing. Thank you.
Councillor Reamer.
Thank you, Lou.
Thank you, and I'm glad Councillor Reid is here to talk about this, because she was involved in this whole process, and she really is our expert on the Riverview area. I want to say that I was somewhat confused when I saw this recommendation. And I was confused because I thought that during the government's process in which they undertook the Heritage Conservation Plan, we had made it clear to them that Council already supports the 2005 Future of Riverview report. And so when I saw this recommendation asking us to reaffirm, I was quite confused. And I know I said to one of my colleagues last Monday when we were talking about this that this is going to create huge angst in the public and for all those people who work so hard on this process. And so I'm going to completely support Councillor Reid's number 2 amendment, that when the government looks at this, they look at the Heritage Conservation Plan in conjunction with the 2005 report. And I support A, B, and C. I don't think A is limiting. I said this last week. I think we need to get on with this. I think we all support for the future of Riverview, at least most of us do. And I agree with Councillor Sikora. He makes a very important point that we're much more of a force if we're united than if we're split on this. So those are really pearls of wisdom that he has said to us tonight. And I think we need to heed his pearls. Thank you.
Nice pearls.
I'm sorry.
It's got pearls.
And I don't mind sharing it with you, council members.
Well, you are magnanimous to a fault, Lou.
Nice jewelry.
I'll have what Councillor Reamer's
It's the
drinking.
gray
Pearls of wisdom. Outstanding. Well, I want to, I'm going to, sorry, I started before you, Councillor Robbins, but I will continue. I think we're unanimous. I believe Council has always been unanimous. I think the Council 5 years ago was unanimous, 3 years ago was unanimous. Riverview lands needs to be held together, and some planning needs to be done as to how to make public use of this jewel in the Lower Mainland. I don't think Council has ever swayed from that. Every now and then we have a big debate over some words like preserve the botanical heritage and ecology of the lands, or promote in the current, actually there was, I just read some words. I've read for the future Riverview probably a dozen times, maybe 20 times. And it says the tranquility, ecology, and history of the entire Riverview lands should be preserved, including the preservation and enhancement of Riverview's various other things. There are some parts of the Riverview lands that have never been tranquil, and yet our report says we must preserve the tranquility. There are other parts of the Riverview lands that really don't have the kinds of values that we're talking about in some aspects of the report. So I think Councillor O'Neill's concern wasn't that he doesn't believe we should go that far, or perhaps even that there wasn't unanimous support around the table for the principles we're all talking about. It's just that the editor in the room said, hang on a second, this isn't what we mean. Our words do mean something, and so actually I listened with interest to his version, because I know he has undoubtedly spent hours poring over the details of this and trying to work out exactly what ought to be said here. I have no trouble particularly with this either, because I've been in Victoria, I've been in Ottawa, and I know full well that no one's going to attach the kinds of significance that we're attaching to the words we're doing here. But in the end, they're going to say, "Oh, there's this 20-page report. What does the summary say?" And the summary says essentially, "Keep it all in one hand." So I'm going to go through a bit of history, as Councillor Reid did, because in the 70s and 80s, I was a student at SFU when we were studying, among my psychology abnormal psych classes, deinstitutionalization, because of course at the time institutions were bad, institutions were horrible, and so deinstitutionalization became the buzzword after you could figure out how to pronounce it. And so really over the 80s, across North America, they deinstitutionalized. In the 90s, across North America, the deinstitutionalization continued with aggression, and there was no one malicious in it. These were people trying to do what they thought was best, which was get people back to the community, get people with mental illnesses served in the community. And unfortunately, it didn't work. There was unintended consequences, and among those consequences was the downtown east side.
We lived through this.
Exactly. And the downtown east side became a casualty to that in large measure. My daughter since then has studied some of these issues and gone all the way to New York and done community court systems and done some work in the downtown east side, including in Insight, the injection site. I've been there and seen some of the ramifications firsthand of the failed public policy that was the absolute deinstitutionalization without support in communities. And of course, all this is a generalization. In the 90s, there was even a plan. There was only one government, actually, that ever put together a plan to sell the lands, and it was the provincial government in the 90s, and a bunch of us rose up. I was party to that movement, and we rose up and we said, hang on a second, met with the local MLA, it was John Kishore at the time, convinced John, and it was actually relatively easy to convince Mr. Kishore. Yeah, he was, and he became one of the advocates, and in fact, a lot of people started dragging politicians through the site, trying to get them to understand the values of the land that we have come to understand. I grew up within a half a kilometer of Riverview Hospital, and that was the place you didn't look at. That was the place you drove past, and it was always part of our community. Everyone on our street knew someone that worked there or worked there themselves, and it was a big, big employer in our community. The closing of it was, I think, not misguided. It was unfortunate that it ended up with the consequences that it ended up with, but it wasn't, these weren't malicious people making malicious decisions. And now we have to deal with them. In the end, you wouldn't reopen it. The model for mental health care as it is today doesn't include great big asylums of 5,000 patients. It includes smaller facilities closer to people's homes so that they can be integrated in large measure, with still some support like we have in the new buildings at Riverview. So this plan, actually, and I'm going on much longer than I thought I would, but this plan was first presented to me. I was in Victoria at the time, and I remember reading it and thinking, this is a good plan. And so I was asked to set up a meeting with the Premier, and we did, and I remember the meeting. It was Warren Jones, it was Mayor Kingsbury, and Warren Jones, myself, and Premier Campbell. And I remember at one point in the meeting he said bluntly, so you want us to give you the land, we want us, the province, to give the city of Coquitlam 244 acres. And Warren Jones, the city manager at the time, said, oh God, no. Because the maintenance cost on the land was something like $5 million or $10 million a year, just to run the land, just to cut the lawn and to maintain the buildings and such. And that still is a massive challenge that the province faces. Add to that some other people that are interested in the land, and ultimately I don't think the decision will be the province's as much as it will be circumstances. So I do want us to work closely with the province. I want us to work closely with this government. If there's a change in government, work closely with the next government to find the solution that keeps it in public hands, used for public purposes. And I believe that the motion before us does that fine. I believe that Councillor O'Neill's version of it does it more succinctly. I think that your amendment would do it fine as well. In the end, I hope that what we end up deciding to do, we do unanimously. And we do with passion, and we do it with support of the community that's behind Riverview Hospital, because there's so many people that believe very passionately in this facility, in the values it has for our community, and the values that we're losing every day as nothing happens on that site. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Well, I too agree that actually I think we are pretty unanimous on this, and we are getting stuck in some wordsmithing, and I think we also need to be pragmatic, because if anything, I haven't learned anything these last 4 years, is that pragmatism will get you a lot further than some of the niggliness that we get caught in. And I think the mayor's comments that when this moves forward, as it's written, I think people will see the intent is there rather than the specifics, and the spirit of the motion, I think, captures exactly what it is. It's like, these are the general things that we'd like you to consider in moving this forward. I do want to point out, though, that Coast Mental Health has done a fabulous job of reusing the buildings on that site and shifting from the institutional uses that they have been to these semi-private, smaller group home settings. And I would love to see more of that because I think there's some real opportunities there. I also support Councillor Reid's almost motion, near motion, it's not really on the floor, or the idea that attaching a vision, because that's part of what's missing from all of this, is that there's no vision. I haven't heard anyone from the province talk about that. I think maybe they have a different vision, but I think we need to be really clear that we have a vision. This is in our community, and this is our vision document that has been worked on for years and supported for years by subsequent councils. So I think it's really important that that document be attached in some way as part of this is our position. So I'm not quite sure exactly where to go from here. I do like, and Councillor Neal says he has an idea. So if he has an idea, I'd like to hear it.
Next on the speakers list, Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate all the comments and insights, and I was already thinking along the lines of Councillor Sikora how important it is for us to be unanimous here, and I really want us to be unanimous. Mm-hmm. And I like Councillor Reid's suggestion as well, and I think the Mayor's analysis of my take on this is quite correct, I was taking a very kind of narrow look at this from a strict editorial legalistic point of view almost, and I'm hearing from everybody that this is much more of an aspirational document, and I'm totally in agreement with the aspirations. I actually used that phrase to describe my support for 1C last week, that I was willing to support that as an aspiration. Now, what I think we could do quite easily here, because I think some of the problem here is the specificity that we have at A, B, and C, because the report is so much more than that, and it does have a different spirit. I'm wondering if we could just simply go with the preamble there, and then add to the preamble Councillor Reid's suggestion. So it would read something like, reaffirm the key priorities for the Riverview lands as identified by the Mayor's Review Task Force for the future review report dated February 3rd, 2005, and also convey to the province that it's most important to read that task force report along with the heritage plan. So and that gets us out of what should be in A, what should be in B, what should be in C, because it's already in the report anyway. And if we summarize the report for them this way and send that message to the government, then that's all the province is going to see. They'll just see A, B, and C, and that's it. Okay, well, maybe we want them to see more. We want to see the totality of it, and if we don't summarize it in this very condensed way, then we're not limiting ourselves there, and we're still getting the main message across. So I would move that that the motion is, as I said, reaffirm the key priorities for the Riverview lands as identified by the Mayor's Riverview Task Force for the future Riverview report dated February 3rd, 2005, and further convey to the province that it is most important to read the heritage plan, the full name of it, along with that 2005 task force report. And I think that satisfies everybody. I can certainly be.
There's words nothing to do on these.
On your part?
He's removed them, though.
Yeah.
His amendment would propose that A, B, and C are removed
entirely
as being an editorial summary.
Yeah. So why summarize it for them?
My two?
Yeah.
Or is he just making up two more?
No. What I'm doing. Thank you for the liberty of Mr.
Please
Mayor.
go ahead.
is saying in the number one, it starts off with a sort of a preamble. And I'm saying we keep all of that except for the word following, because we're not going to list A, B, and C, because that gets us into trouble from what I can see, because it really narrows it, or it tells the province that's all we're really interested in. It doesn't capture. Why are we summarizing it in this very narrow kind of a way? So I think we can just go number one, and also to convey to the province what your motion was. So
you're going to take my motion as it's written then?
yes, and that's just part of one big motion now. That does the clerk understand that?
I do.
And Councillor Robinson seconded that.
Can we have that resolution read?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll have the Deputy City Clerk read the resolution as she took it.
Yeah.
Excellent. That Council reaffirm the key priorities for the Riverview lands as identified by the Mayor's Riverview Task Force in the For the Future of Riverview report dated February 3rd, 2005, and further convey to the province that it must...
That's most important.
That they must read and consider the Riverview Lands Heritage Conservation Plan in conjunction with the For the Future of Riverview report, and forward this recommendation to the province along with a copy of the report. Okay. Yep.
But that's what you're happy with, and the council read it.
Yes.
That is the motion that is now on the floor.
Round one. She seconded it.
I'm going to accept
I believe Councillor
that motion. Okay. Yeah, Councillor Hodge is next, so I'm going to.
Okay.
Councillor Hodge.
Yeah, I can support that. I think it achieves, in many respects, what Councillor Reid is saying, and that is that the two documents go hand in hand. And so with the wording that Councillor Neal is proposing, he's just basically saying we reaffirm what's in this document. Councillor Reid is saying read this in tandem with the other. So I think the two makes sense to go together. My concern all along is that this has started out as a review of the Riverview Lands Heritage Conservation Plan, a plan that's 100 pages, and we've been asked to comment on the plan. That's really what we've done. And I suppose by saying we support the plan, and we already covered some of that off last week, and we're saying, but also we have a vision and we want the two to be looked at together. I have some other concerns that aren't covered in the Future of Riverview report that I think are timely in respect to the Riverview Lands Heritage Conservation Plan. So I don't know if we want to finish dealing with this, and then I'll put the other two motions on the floor, and maybe move for separation. We cover this with the understanding that I'm going to bring two items forward that I think should be part of the messaging to the province. So maybe we'll look at this part of it, and then I'll introduce the two items that I want to bring forward as well. Should I? Okay. Do you want me to read what I'm proposing? Okay. Okay. In view of the fact that things have changed, I mean the future of what we plan for Riverview hasn't changed in 7 years. I think our vision and our plans are the same, and so that's why I support endorsing the report. The one thing that has changed is that Provincial Health Services has left the property. And one of the things that was covered off in the Heritage Conservation Plan is the need to do something with the buildings immediately, whether it's mothballing or what the decision is. And I think that if we are going to have a future for Riverview, and because we don't know how long the land use phase is going to take, I believe that we also have to convey a message to the provincial government that we need some immediate action. So therefore, I want to propose a motion that the City of Coquitlam write a letter to the province of British Columbia noting that immediate action will be necessary and needs to be sufficient for protecting the heritage values, and therefore ask the province to actively look to reuse the buildings, which will help to stabilize them and generate revenue to help maintain the grounds and the buildings. And I'd also like to make a second point, and that is that in light of the recognized values of these heritage lands and the 22,000 signature petition that was delivered to the legislature in 2000, request that the province support the application of Riverview as a National Historic Site.
Okay, that isn't a motion.
It was a motion, wasn't it?
I made a motion, okay? I'll back it and say as a motion.
Is that an emotion?
An emotion and a motion.
I'm sorry. I know you said it with emotion, but
I'd like to make
that's
this as
an
a
amendment
motion.
then.
An amendment to the...
But I'm not going. I won't treat it as an amendment because it is different from the motion is pretty clear here. The motion is that we reaffirm. This is a motion to write a letter related to the immediacy of protecting the buildings, and I think it's entirely valid, and I will vote for it. But I won't. I'll rule against it and then vote for it later. Is that okay?
Okay.
So I think we need to do
So-
that. It's just a separate action.
Yeah, okay.
From this one. And in fact, the letter may well be going to different people from the measures that we're talking about here. Is there anything else related to the motion that's on the floor now, which was an amended?
If we can cover that one off and then deal with this separately. I was under the understanding you wanted to hear what this was.
Yeah, and I do want to.
Okay.
I did want to hear
Okay.
what it was, but I think it's better off left as not as a motion yet until we get until we have the floor cleared of other motions. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was actually going to, having seconded what I thought was Councillor Hodges' motion, I was then going to explain why I thought it should be dealt with separately. So thank you for doing that. And I don't think I can add anything to the point that we're at on the first motion. I think that we've found a good balance, a good, solid direction. And one reason I think that parts 1 and 2 stand separately from what Councillor Hodges just proposed is that that motion should live, should travel with these documents throughout consideration over the months and hopefully not years to come in Victoria and in other places, whereas the matter that we'll deal with in a few minutes calls for action now. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will support the motion that's on the floor. I want us to understand, though, that the way in which we normally convey those is by way of a letter. Usually it's signed by either a manager or the mayor. The letter usually goes on to explain that's A, B, and C anyway, but the passage of this motion is the first and foremost portion of the letter. The explanation can be wordsmiths, and I will actually take advice from council as we figure out what that letter is going to look like, assuming that this passes. Any further discussion on the motion on the floor? All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
What is it?
Okay. I will
What is it?
move that we send a letter to the provincial government outlining the 2 points. Do you like me to read them again, or I've got them on the stick. If I can give them, I don't know if we can put them up on the screen. I've got it up on the main one now. With my spelling mistake, or my spacing.
That was the second last line.
You want?
That's
What? And that's?
should be
Okay.
that.
And that. Okay. All right.
Hey, I must say it's well typed.
I'm working on it as I go here.
And you know it's
Yep.
Yeah. Moved by
Wordsmith it?
Moved by Councillor Hodge, seconded by Councillor Nicholson.
I'm working on the fly here.
A motion that is very similar to the one that's on the screen.
Yep.
Related to the heritage.
Yeah, I think that
noting that immediate action to preserve Riverview.
okay.
Enough to get in the door.
Or preserve the heritage values, protect, preserve. I think that,
Okay. Councillor Hodge, speak.
okay. I think that the concern that we have is that in the heritage conservation plan, it makes mention of a number of actions that can be taken. It lists 15 possible actions, mothballing being one of them. And I think that one of the things that it also mentions is that we need to there has to be a plan for stabilizing the building. And so, you know, the challenge here is that we have had to move quickly on this. We haven't had time to sort of meet with the committee, but members of the Riverview Lands Committee that have spoken to me have all said that one of the things that they want to see happen is use of the buildings. And I think one of the best ways to preserve the buildings in the interim is to make sure that the buildings are being used. You know, keeping the heat on the building, having the buildings used provides security. It also helps to generate some revenue, which will help to maintain the grounds and the buildings. And I think that while we're looking at the Heritage Conservation Plan and while the provincial government is looking at the Heritage Conservation Plan, I think it's important to them to recognize that we have to move quickly, especially in view of the fact that the next part of this process is going to be land use, and we don't know how long it's going to take to go through that phase. And so in the interim, we have to make sure that there's something left to work with. And we talked in the last meeting about what's happened to West Lawn and some of the buildings that have been allowed to decay and deteriorate because of neglect. And had West Lawn been used for the last 20 years, it would not have got to the state that it is today. And I fear that some of the other buildings that are there, if we don't find ways to repurpose and reuse them, that they may meet the same fate as West Lawn. And so I think that we have to, either in conjunction with the other letter or send another message to Victoria, that we need to immediately, you know, look for uses for these buildings and to stabilize them so that they don't continue to deteriorate further. And further, one of the things that we have gone on record as a council and previous councils is to support the application for the National Historic Site. And so that's what I think the second part of this does, is it reaffirms our request to ask that Victoria support that application.
Okay.
And I look to Councillor O'Neill to help me wordsmith this, because as I said, I was typing this quickly so we could just get something up on the screen.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Sikora while we're
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor. You know, I feel like going around the block first before I come to say anything, because my blood is starting to boil. Because we were united on what has been happening, and I thought that was a pretty good enough resolution. Now here we come with something brand new to support. Now, you know, first of all, I'm going to tell the government that they should be using their buildings to generate revenue, to maintain their gardens, grounds, and buildings. I don't think I have a right to say that. If they haven't got anybody in Victoria that they can think that, then I'm in a different world. Okay. Secondly, you know, province support the application for Riverview lands as a National Historic Site. They turned it down just a few months ago. you know, and now we're reinstating this motion, you know. I mean, I think this should be taken off, because I'll tell you, I'm not going to support it. And I'll tell you, it's not going to be unanimous. Then we're going to have a problem. And I'm telling you right now, I will not support this. I think we had a motion on the floor that looked good enough for all of us, and it made a lot of sense. This is coming out of, I know what Councillor Hodge is trying to do, and they're trying to bring forward something maybe a little addition and a little stronger, but I'll tell you something, let's not go that route, because we're going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg, and I will not be supporting it. So if you want a unanimous vote, and if the provincial government gets this one and it's not unanimous, you know what they'll do. And that's exactly what I was saying earlier.
Thank you. Councillor O'Neill.
I understand Councillor Sikor's concerns, and I understand Councillor Hodge's sentiments here. The Heritage Conservation Plan that we gave our unanimous support of last week has on page 87 a list of 5 immediate actions. And essentially, I think what we're doing with certainly the first paragraph of this two-part motion that Councillor Hodge is suggesting is in less detail and asking them to do what this is doing. And actually, it's better stated and more realistic in this, actually, in the Heritage Conservation Plan that we supported last week. It's very quickly. Number 1 was to prepare stabilization strategies. Number 2, commission a high-level condition survey. Number 3 of this 5-part thing is the most important one. Conduct a feasibility study for the reuse of buildings that are character-defining, including a facility condition index assessment, which they call an FCI, I'm sure we'll remember that captures the economic and heritage value of existing structures. Consider the economic feasibility of reusing existing buildings as opposed to building new. Ensure a heritage conservation expert is involved in any feasibility study for heritage resources. I mean, that captures a very realistic and a very detailed and common sense sort of approach to this. That we've already supported that, and that, as Councillor Robinson and I were just chatting about this, that support goes back to the heritage people. I imagine that we could send a letter on top of that that says, treat very seriously the 3.5, the immediate actions, the 5. We want to draw your attention that we really think that immediate action is needed. And these 5 points specify those immediate actions in a much better way, I think, than this. So I would say just, and we can, I don't really have a problem to re-ask Victoria to, in light of the publication of the Heritage Conservation Plan, because this is new. Since the last time that the province turned down the request to support Riverview as a National Historic Site, this hadn't come out. Now that this has come out, we can ask them again to reconsider. So if we word it that way, I've got no problem. But so for the first paragraph, I would say we shouldn't do that. We should just ask them to pay particular attention to the immediate actions and to take immediate action on the immediate actions. And the second part, I would say that not in light of the recognized value of these heritage lands, in light of the release now of the Heritage Conservation Plan for the Riverview lands, and also the earlier signature that we request the province reconsider its support for the application of Riverview as a National Historic Site. So I think that actually makes a stronger argument for number 2, and I think it makes a more concise and more, and we're not trying to reinvent something here for number 1, we're actually going with this. So. And again, I thank Councillor Robinson for last week pointing out we both discovered this about the same time. And it's a very important part of the document, the immediate action part of the document. And so, again, that comes to the fore right now. So, I think that makes for a much better motion that I would be willing to support. And I think I saw Councillor Sikora agreeing there that that if we draw their attention to this and then we slightly, for the first part, and then slightly rework number 2, I think that satisfies me.
Mr. Dumont.
Sorry, not to add to the debate, but Council did pass a very similar motion to what Councillor O'Neill was talking about last week. The Council requested the Riverview Lands Heritage Conservation Plans propose strategies to preserve the heritage-defining elements of the site, as noted under immediate actions, be initiated as soon as possible. Right. So something very similar was moved and unanimously passed last week.
So it could be Council reiterates its request from last
we
week.
don't want to do that.
Councillor Robinson, you're next. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
I actually want to point out that this is different because what we passed last time was feedback to the people who put this plan together. And my assumption is that that's going back to those people and they're going to incorporate it. But that's my assumption. And this, I understand, is very different. This is about council writing a letter to the province that goes directly to the province. So that's how I'm understanding this motion before us. So I also don't read it as inconsistent, and maybe we do need to wordsmith it. But what caught my attention, and partly because we felt we were so rushed, this was a large document and didn't get a chance to sort of really digest it in any real way. But and we did say, you know, we want these 5 things, but I think we ought to be putting a bit of priority on number 3. I'd like to emphasize the value of reusing the buildings, because I think that should be, if you have to prioritize these 5, I would think from what I'm understanding is that the 3rd item in this immediate actions list should be the first consideration, or it should be the priority, is to try to reuse these buildings where possible. So that's how I'm understanding this, and that we want to communicate directly to the province and not to the people putting this together. This isn't feedback. This is directly to province. Am I making sense? Yeah. Okay. So, so I'm reading, and maybe we just need a bit of time to wordsmith this, but the way I'm reading this is that, yes, we support the immediate actions and want to draw your attention to, I can't think off the top of my head, want to draw your attention to, you know, item 3 in the list of 5 actions as the most valuable or the most important, something that sort of speaks to that this is the most important immediate action that you can take. So I think that that's my understanding of what this is. And I'm glad to hear that Councillor Sikora can get on board with encouraging the province to support the application of Riverview as a National Historic Site in light of this document. I like the way Councillor O'Neill has characterized that. I think that works, because the province didn't turn it down, actually. What they said is, well, we're doing our own heritage plan. So it's like, great, okay, you've done your heritage plan, now get busy here, you know, take care of business, as they say, and support this National Historic Site application. So I think it's time to remind them that that they have something on table. So I don't know if anyone would care to wordsmith this a little bit better. I'm getting really tired, and I'm not good at it at this point in day.
Really, what I'm looking for is a motion that the mayor's office or staff write to everyone they can think of about all of these issues.
Yes.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Reid just quietly asked me if we need to do this tonight, and I'm afraid I think we do. We don't meet next week, and I think this is, as has been said, going to the province, not back to the Heritage Conservation Plan folks, and it's asking them for action. Let me look at the second paragraph first, and I appreciate Councillor O'Neill's suggestion, and I think some language in there about, in light of this plan coming forward, we remind you of the 22,000 signatures, and it's now time to go to this National Historic Site. The first paragraph, though, I continue to support as it stands. I know that we have a page in here called immediate actions. Councillor Hodge and I are perhaps looking at this through slightly different eyes than the rest of you, because we had the privilege of a tour some of the buildings at Riverview. And a common theme throughout the tour was the fundamental belief that you can't reuse these buildings, that these buildings are done for, these buildings have huge problems. So when we talk about a feasibility study for the reuse of buildings that are character defining, commissioning a high-level condition survey of the identified character defining and so on, we've all here at Council seen reports that we thought were going to give us a range of choices, but that actually limited those down in the assumptions at the beginning of the report. So we've got some assumptions, and from those we now conclude thus and so. So I have little hope for the feasibility study for the reuse of buildings. I believe the first step in the list on page 87 is the chosen course of action. Stabilization strategies such as mothballing. And if you look at West Lawn, you know what happens when you mothball. You know, the roof falls in, the trees start growing out of the brickwork, and it just gets worse and worse, and it becomes, unusability becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think, yes, immediate action is necessary. And then those need to be sufficient to protect the heritage values. The best, quickest way to do that is to put the buildings into use. When they're occupied, they're warm, their people are paying attention, they're secure, and they'll generate some revenue or reduce provincial costs elsewhere in order to provide the means to maintain both the grounds and the buildings. Otherwise, it's a net loser and nobody's going to want to do anything about it. So I think this is an important thing to say. I also think that the last motion that we passed unanimously, I think it was critical that that be unanimous. I don't think it's as important that this be unanimous. I think direction of council is what we're looking for here, and if not all of us are completely agreed, that's unfortunate, but I think this is the direction that we have to go in. Thank you.
So,
Councillor O'Neill, wordsmith and come up with something that...
Well, I don't agree with the general drift of this because we're asking the province to actively look to reuse the buildings. And some of those buildings haven't been used in how many years? Which would help stabilize them, generate revenue. You know, I think the immediate actions of the report is far more realistic. It is far more doable. It's a sort of thing that a government could look at and say, yeah, you know, this is realistic. And they look at this motion and say, they want us to reuse all the buildings? Come on, get serious. Reusing all the buildings? Well, the buildings, that implies, you know, not some of the buildings, not the best of the buildings, not those buildings with the most heritage value. This is the buildings. That means the buildings on the site are the buildings. Those are the buildings. And so that's, you know, I'm in cabinet and I see this and I go, oh, come on, what are they smoking? I really do. So I think we should be more specific, and I think we should give them something they can get their teeth into that say, yeah, this sounds like a reasonable plan. I think we can do this.
is it possible that council will permit that the letter from the mayor's office will incorporate the sentiment in the first big paragraph there without instructing the province, but rather perhaps suggesting that the building shouldn't be left empty, that as much as possible they should remain heated, and you may have to find tenants in order to pay for the heat, etc., but ultimately not telling them what to do. That letter that asks for that preservation of immediate steps to preserve the properties also says keep them warm, keep them dry, and occupied is sometimes better than unoccupied. I have difficulty with the paragraph as it's written, so I'm looking for the potential that we convert this to the request related to the National Historic Site, full stop. Councillor Hodge.
I'm just pointing this out. I think that the message that I'm trying to get across, and I think you've captured it, is, and in item 1 of immediate actions, it does say prepare stabilization strategies. My concern is in the report it uses such as mothballing. And I think that what we want to find is a stabilization strategy that maybe has more potential to protect the buildings than mothballing them. And that's why I have suggested here that we look at reuse as a stabilization strategy. And I think if we want to word it in such a way as to suggest that we look for uses, I think the intent of mine is to suggest that we should just lock the doors and walk away from the site to come back in however many years that the land use plan takes, because I think there's uses for the lands in the interim. I'm certainly not going to try to tell the landlord who we can, who they can rent to or what they can do with the property, but I think that we want to send a message to Victoria that from a community standpoint that we believe that there's the potential to continue using some of the buildings, but I think that that we also want to recognize that there may be potential economic generating factors on the site. And to me, a stabilization plan should go beyond just considering mothballing. So somewhere between mothballing and which is noted here, and my recommendation, I'm comfortable with the intent of just saying that take some action, don't let the buildings deteriorate, and finding use in the interim may be one of the options to help to stabilize them. Which, if that's sort of close to where you're going with it, is just saying leave the wording and leave it open, but just the thought being try to find some use for them in the interim and don't let them deteriorate.
Councillor Zakora.
Yeah, thank you. Here's the situation. I think we passed a real good resolution. It was a good one. I think it incorporated everything that was said, and incorporated what Councillor O'Neill said, what Councillor Reid said, and the fact is it's a good one. Now we're going to go ahead into something else, and now we're going to tell the government what they should do. That's the worst thing that we can possibly do. It'd be like, I said to the mayor, it'd be like a janitor for the city hall walking into his office and telling them what he should be doing to run his office.
They do that all the time.
That'd be about the same, believe me. And I've never read in a report about any buildings being mothballed. Or am I wrong? Or is there something in your reports that there's some mothballing? Okay. And some of those buildings probably should be, because they cannot be reused, they cannot be restored. You've seen pictures of them, and it's impossible. So what we're trying to do is tie the hands of the government to something that is impossible to do, and then to tell them somehow that they should be renting some of their buildings to cut the expenses for themselves on maintaining the grounds and the gardens. I mean, are they a bunch of yahoos in Victoria? I don't think so. I don't think so. It's a government like we are to make decisions. So I don't think for 1 minute that we, as a junior government, matter of fact, a baby of Victoria, tell them what to do. Okay, and that's why I'm really opposed to this resolution, because frankly, I will not send a letter to the government telling them what they should be doing with the buildings, or that they should generate revenue to maintain the grounds and buildings. Come on. I don't think it's our duty to do that.
Councillor Robinson.
I got to go home soon.
I actually don't think we're telling the province to do anything. If you look carefully at the language, it says that we ask the province to actively look, and I would suggest possibly tweaking it, that we ask the province to, where feasible, actively look to reuse the buildings, or put where feasible after, reuse the buildings where feasible. Because I think that's a piece of what...
I was going to say, reuse as many of the buildings as possible.
Reuse as many of the buildings as possible, but really, this isn't telling the province to do anything in particular. The province will make their own decision. This is an ask from the city where Riverview lands are, and this is an ask on behalf of our residents. So I think this is an ask, not a tell, not a dictating to the senior level of government. And so I would, if I could, make a slight amendment, and maybe we would ask the mayor's office to do this. I can't figure out exactly where, but where feasible, or as many of the buildings as possible, something to that effect that would just...
I'm going to actually accept that as integral to the motion. The motion then actually says something like to reuse buildings to the extent possible.
To the extent possible, something to that effect.
Yeah. I mean, this would never be the wording of the letter.
Right.
This is the letter's intent.
Intent,
And,
exactly.
The wording will be,
exactly.
well, the wording will then incorporate the dialogue around the table, and I think we're all of the same opinion that the province needs to take steps to stop the degradation of the building.
Yes.
The province needs to take, and some of those steps may well be heating them and that sort of stuff.
Right.
And the province also ought to buy into the idea now that it's a National Historic Site.
Absolutely.
I think if we allow the flexibility of write a letter to the province of BC with the following sentiments, essentially.
Yes.
And the letter will be crafted.
That is it.
Is that okay with everybody?
That's a good.
Okay. Councillor Nicholson, Councillor Hodge, you're both on the list. You're both fine. Councillor Nicholson, go ahead.
Because I've been waiting for some time to say I'm quite happy with your suggestion that you craft a letter. And I have absolutely no difficulty if you ask Councillor O'Neill to help you with the words. But I'll offer you one to think about.
I'll get him to help me with the big words.
I'll offer you anything over 3 syllables. No, that's Don Cunnings if they're over 3 syllables. As I'm sitting here looking at this, it seems to me that a message I would like to try and communicate, and you may use it or not as you wish. Our interest is preservation, and I think preservation is a higher order than stabilization. Stabilization is what's worrying some of us over in this corner of the table. So if you bear that in mind, I'd appreciate it. And other than that, I'm done. Thank you.
There you go. Councillor Hodge, last word.
I'm going to withdraw that. This wasn't really intended to be actual wording, so I'm going to withdraw that. I think in agreement on the second point that we do want to make the ask for the provincial government to support the application for national heritage. I think we've done that before, so that's just a re-ask. It can possibly be in the same letter. So I'm comfortable. I think that after this discussion, I think there actually is some agreement around the table. Maybe not on the wording, but I think there's some agreement that we recognize that we want to try to take some actions to preserve the lands, and I'm quite comfortable with. Your worship, sending a letter to that effect and wording it in such a way that we get that message to the provincial government. So I'm okay with that. In fact, if it hasn't been moved, I will move that we do so, that we have you write a letter to the provincial government.
It is the motion that's on the floor now that we've converted. That you would.
Councillor Robinson made it, so I'll second. Good.
Yeah, we're all good with it. Is that your understanding of the motion as it sits now? Is that those sentiments will be captured in a letter from my office?
Good.
Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, you're right. Fact is, I think that, what, if you just use the bottom part and in light of the recognition value of these heritage buildings and so on, if that was the thing that was added on, I wouldn't have no difficulty. But it's the top part that bothers me. Now you're going to change it. It's fine with me.
Okay, good. We're done.
Okay. My goodness. Quickly, all in favor, opposed. The motion carries unanimously.
We'll all look forward to seeing
Okay, I happened to be searching something, and I'll spend 30 seconds here. This is from Didron, an archaeologist, who says, "It is better to preserve than to repair. Better to repair than to restore, but better to restore than to reconstruct." And I think that right now we're just trying to preserve the possibility of any one of the following. That'll go in my letter. What the heck? Ms. Deputy City Clerk.
Moving on. Item 12 is a notice of motion to encourage citizen engagement in town hall meetings. The recommendation is that Council give consideration to the following notice of motion presented by Councillor O'Neill and seconded by Councillor Robinson at the October 15th, 2012 regular Council meeting. Whereas the Council of the City of Coquitlam holds at least 2 public town hall meetings a year with the intention of engaging.
Therefore.
Be it resolved.
Be it resolved that Council directs staff to examine the possibility of and to report back on the staging of future town hall meetings which are webcasted, and for the benefit of those citizens who are watching the webcast, that such meetings also employ communications technologies allowing but not limited to the receipt and display of emailed and Twittered comments and questions, and also allows citizens to communicate their questions and comments by phone in a way that their calls can be broadcast within the meeting site.
Councillor O'Neill on his motion.
Thank you. I think it pretty well speaks for itself.
Good. Councillor Sikora.
And I do want to just, I actually have some information that I'd like to share with people about this. In response to the admirable publicity that this motion received in the Now and the News, I received an email from Jeff Scott of Tri-Cities TV. And he says that perhaps Tri-Cities Community TV could factor into the motion you made for the city to webcast or stream the town hall meetings. He says he knows that Shaw has a policy of not covering meetings that are not held in council chambers. Jeff says that it may well be, and we can't hold him to this, of course, but if Tri-Cities Community TV provides volunteers and requests a mobile command post, they have a little thing that, what's it called, the production facility from Shaw, that Tri-Cities would be able to provide a solution to get this out onto television as well as webcast. So there's another possibility, another reason we should open this up. Again, the motion speaks for itself, and I think there's general agreement, so I'm not going to belabor the point. Thank you.
Councillor Sikora on the general agreement part.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the town hall meetings are of a good. It doesn't matter whether it's 50 people show up or 40 people, whatever it is. It is a good thing to listen to the people. But my problem is when we put ads in the paper, what does the ad show? SkyTrain coming to Coquitlam, kids playing in the swimming pool. This is our town hall meeting we're advertising. There's not a broad kind of, we kind of try and decorate the ads so everybody likes them and says, hell, why do I want to go to that meeting? Everything is okay. SkyTrain is here. The kids are playing in the swimming pool and blah, 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 and everything is fine. See? And then you get this last one, the budget. Only 8 cents on the dollar that you can spend. 8%, that's what it is. Not 8 cents on the dollar, it's 8%. On a $245 million budget, it's like $20-odd million. Okay? So maybe that's what we should be using. Okay? And what programs would you like to see cut to lower the taxes? What do you mean? Is that the only way that you can survive in this city? You have to cut a program to lower the taxes? I remember the day when I became a rookie council member in '72. Jim Tunn became the mayor. And you know what he did? He said every department head will cut their budget by 5%, outside the police and the fire department. And as a rookie alderman, I said, no kidding, I'm going to get hundreds and hundreds of calls from people. You know something? There wasn't a peep. 5% was cut. I guarantee you today, if we said to each department head outside the police and the fire department, you want to cut your budget by 3%.
I don't know.
I don't think, well, I'm just saying how to, no, hold it, just a second. Councilor Robinson, you'll have your time to speak. Do you mind if I speak? Okay. Yeah, I am speaking to the motion. The fact is, you want to get people out to vote or to come to the town hall meetings, and you'll get them out. But you know what? Put in facts before them. or now, like this afternoon, we had a presentation that 99% of the people are happy with the city of Coquitlam. Not true, because you have maybe 60% will say that are happy, and you'll have 35% will say somewhat happy. You combine them as very happy. A wrong thing to do. See?
Okay, but the motion is to have Twitter at the town hall meetings.
Yeah, so you have to separate these kind of things. But there's so many things that we do, and that's the bureaucratic way of doing things. Okay, politically, it doesn't make any sense. Okay, thanks.
Okay, on the motion to have Twitter and such things on town hall meetings, Councillor Robbins.
Thank you. What I thought was very interesting was the phone calls from the local papers asking why I would even consider seconding something from Councillor O'Neill. And
we all wondered that.
Well, I want to thank Councillor O'Neill for inviting me to second this notice of motion, because it speaks to my values. I think it speaks to the fact that I'm a regular blogger. I tweet out regularly, trying to do what I can to engage as many people as I can. And that's what this speaks to. And I think that we all share that value. I don't think we're unique to that. But I do recognize that this is going to be challenging for many who are not yet familiar with some of the technology. There's a sort of a stretch. And so I appreciate those who are not familiar with it, what some of the challenges might be, not knowing. But I have to tell you, I was able to watch the debate, of the presidential debate, on Twitter during our dinner break, because I was able to get comments from different people about what was going on. So technically, no, I did not watch the debate, but I was able to get a sense of what was going on. And I imagine that our town hall meetings would be much the same way, where we could have people tweeting out what's going on at our town hall meeting, and those who might be at a soccer game or at their kids' ballet recital or whatever can take a quick peek or go over the history and could see sort of what were some of the issues that came up in the Twitter feed during the town hall meeting, so that they may not physically be in the room, but they might be able to tweet to us to say, I have some concerns about this or that, and I want to know what council feels about that. So I think that we'll be able to get a bigger reach, and so I want to thank Councillor O'Neill for continuing to stretch and push for different ways to do community engagement, and I hope everyone else will join along. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be really, really brief. I entirely support this. I'm hoping that it will get me to the point where I learn to tweet and twit and whatever else is to do. But I want to show that I'm not the only one, or Councillor O'Neill's not the only one who can wordsmith. And I actually mentioned this to him last week. In the middle of the third line, it says webcasted, and I suggest that webcast is the word. I don't think we broadcasted anything. A friendly amendment, Councillor O'Neill. Thank you.
Now I feel
I'm done.
Okay.
Comment, just one, if you don't mind.
Okay. Am I allowed to have a little bit of, can I make a little more myself? Okay, thanks. Okay, we'll go back to Councillor O'Neill in a moment. I have only some hesitation as to logistics, and one of the challenges with the notice of motion process is that I often find it produces awkward moments for staff. Staff are in the process right now of generating a new staff report that was called for in the middle of the summer related to the location of the town hall meetings, for example, because there was some dialogue about having town hall meetings potentially at city council chambers so that they can be webcast, because webcasting them from some other location is hard. And it's all set up here. We can webcast with a flick of a switch, and we can have a meeting at any time, webcast from here. That report will come back to us probably in November. It will probably get now mixed with this, the result of this, because this will pass unanimously, I suspect. And so I would have preferred to have that dialogue or that discussion primarily at the session where we're discussing how to engage people more in the town hall meetings. The town hall meetings, we had the same, virtually the same 30 or 40 people that we traditionally get, some new ones and some great thoughts and great voices, but how do we engage more people in that? And this is a way, I think, of engaging more people. Twitter and social media in general is a way. In fact, I posted the council agenda on several things this morning and received comments back, including comments during meetings about particular items and questions. And there's at least one person in the audience today who was here because he saw it on Facebook and came with a letter that he had intended to have council have during their dialogue related to Riverview. The technology is there. Let's use it. Let's make sure, in this case, there's some logistic questions. I don't know that this commits anybody because staff are going to report back. When the report comes back related to Town Hall, I suspect they'll incorporate both of these things in there, and I look forward to seeing what the public has to say about this, and I'll watch my Twitter feed. Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, just one comment that none of this would preclude citizen involvement in a good old-fashioned way. If people don't want to tweet, if they don't want to sit at home and watch on the webcast, if they don't want to watch a cable TV feed, if they don't want to use their phone after watching the webcast to phone in comments, they still would have the right to come down here in person and participate in the good old-fashioned way. So I want to make that very clear. This isn't going to be some sort of process that would cut off all of that. So if you don't have to be afraid of, you don't have to embrace tweeting or emailing or anything like that. You can still do it the good old-fashioned way. Thank you.
Yep, and in fact, that was always a discussion when we raised the issue of online voting or other means of voting. The public does come out with perhaps a criticism that, hang on a second, I like the ballot. In all these cases, these are additive, not replacements of the existing systems. Okay, the motion is before us. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. I bet you. The motion from Councillor Reid is to adjourn, seconded by Councillor Sikora. I bet you that's going to pass unanimously too. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. We'll have a public question period. Any questions on this afternoon's agenda? Any really, really short questions, like two-word questions would be great. David.
It's been a long day for me as well.
No, please.
To identify myself, David Spence is my name. I live in Port Moody. And I feel a little embarrassed at this time because listening to the conversation about item number 11 on your agenda regarding the Riverview lands, I'm not up to speed with the report from 2005 that this council has made. I read about a month ago of a public meeting that the committee for the Riverview Lands Conservation Plan was calling for in Port Coquitlam and in Coquitlam. So I attended the first meeting on October the 1st and discovered that there was a great gap of lack of information about a part of the history and the heritage of Riverview lands, particularly regarding the religious component of the life of that institution. Upon further inquiries, I discovered that a statement of significance of the heritage culture of healing and care is important for the well-being and the care and what the Riverview institution, Essendale, was to provide for those who needed that kind of service. And when talking with the staff, I asked them, what about the religious history of the institution? Because it would have been an important and significant part of the life of that institution 100 years ago when Essendale was first established. And they said, well, no one's raised it. No one's talked about it. No one has even thought about asking the many chaplains over the 100 years if they had any concern about what was being preserved. No one had thought of the chapels that were incorporated into some of the buildings in that institution. And so I took it upon myself to do a little bit of homework, and the result has been that I have talked with some previous chaplains and have gathered some information about the history of the religious care of the body, mind, and soul of the patients of Riverview. I haven't finished my research. I haven't talked to all the chaplains that are still alive and around, but I have talked to some of them. And I will continue to push for a religious recognition of the history and the heritage of that culture of healing and care of body, mind, and soul. Now, today, we wouldn't refer to the religious history. We would refer to it in terms of language, the spiritual care. And nevertheless, the many denominations, and primarily Christian denominations that were part of the religious culture of the center, we're at a point of being very multi-faith and inclusive of the plurality of religions in the community and of the care of well-being of the whole person, and not only of the whole individual person, but of the whole community. And I think in preservation efforts by this council and by the provincial government needs to recognize in some sort of way the religious, spiritual, sacred serenity of the place. And my question to you, because this is a question period,
I was about to ask you to get to a question.
The clock is still sitting that I've got 5 minutes left. So my question is this council able to incorporate into any of its decision-making processes and conversation with the provincial government, down to 2 minutes, the religious, spiritual, sacred component of the Riverview conservation plans?
Absolutely, and I will commit that I suspect there's at least one or two of us that have taken notes on this one, because it's an element that I don't think we've envisioned that much, and bringing the Tri-City Ministerial, for example, to the debate, not to the debate, but to the discussion about how the future of these lands, I think adds a dimension that is certainly worth exploring.
Yeah.
And so,
okay. For the record, Your Worship, I thank you for the opportunity of speaking and putting it on the table, and that you'll be able to carry it forward.
And for the record, this is question period, so I've ruled you out of order.
I shall sit down. Thank you.
But thank you very much. That was very insightful, and your letter is very, very well placed. Okay. This last weekend we had 2 memorials for 2 young people who died too young, and one of them, Leo Chan's mother, had us all distribute rose petals. This community joins in mourning both of their losses. And one last quote: "We will probably be judged not by the monuments we build, but by those we destroy." That was a New York Times editorial. Thank you all for coming. Are there any other questions from the audience? Thank you all.